So while I have you as a captive audience, let me ask a favor. I don't know if Cindy will appreciate me saying this or not, but a couple days ago, she was just putting her yoga mat on the floor, and just totally, her back went totally out, And so would you all just pray for her? She's struggling. It's been a few days. She's getting a little better maybe every day, but my one advantage of this job is I can ask you to pray for her. And I know that's the kind of people you are anyways. You'd love to just pray for anybody and everybody. So thank you in advance for doing that. With her back out, I have to do some of the, quote, wifely duties. I know, I struggle. I'm a martyr. Like, wifely duties like today, I had to shovel the driveway. She didn't even get out and do that. So I can't wait till she's back to doing all this stuff. No, that's not one of her duties. I'm just trying to bring humor into our lives. This homily is, as much as any other homily, it really is more than anything else about who we are. And it's about who we are, not just ideally, like religion does a lot of times, but who we are practically. We are a Eucharistic people. Eucharist just means thanksgiving. It means a people who give thanks all the time. What's our thing say here? Lift up your hearts, we lift them to the Lord. Let us give thanks to the Lord. It is right and just. It is right and just, our duty and our salvation always and everywhere to give thanks. And so we're an always everywhere people who give thanks. And so I want to acknowledge that we are a thankful people, but I also want to begin this homily by saying thank you to all of you for supporting our parish with your presence, with your thoughts, with your time, with your many talents, and with your faithful tithe. This is very much who we are, and I think people want to give. I think people want to be generous. It's natural to us to just be really, really generous. It makes us happy. People who volunteer time live longer. It's just because they're happier people. And people want to follow Jesus' teaching. And we want to follow his teaching on stewardship. Sometimes we just need to hear it over again. I know I do too. Sometimes we just need permission to be generous, to follow Jesus and his teachings on all these things. I want to tell you, let me tell you something. In COVID, right when it first hit, and we weren't allowed to let people come into the masses, and we hadn't yet set up all the streaming ability, and we didn't set up all the online giving. Our giving was way, way down, and so I had to do a special ask. I printed out some of our best givers. Beth ran the list of people who have given the most that year, and I called them and asked for a special donation. And they all said yes. They all stepped up. It was really beautiful. But I want you to know that some of those people that I called were ministry team people, and we pay them on a church salary. And so I just wanted you to know that our ministry team is in there with you. They're not hypocrites on this. They're some of our biggest tithers, some of our biggest givers, and we can join with them and say, yeah, I want to be part of that too. I know that they don't make a lot because they work at church, but they give a lot because they believe this stuff, and I know you're believers as well. I want to tell you a funny story. I know this fellow, and some of you do too. Long time ago, he used to preach here a lot. And but whenever, I won't tell you who he is, a long time ago. And whenever he went to dinner or lunch with other priests, he had this habit of right when he could see that the waitress was bringing the check, he would always say, "Oh, excuse me, I got to go to the bathroom." And he would run to the bathroom, and he would stay there until someone else picked up the check. And he got a reputation for doing that. And I thought, that's pretty funny. And I always watched for that. But I think sometimes here, you probably know people like that, but I think sometimes here, we come for this meal much better than any restaurant meal, and some just expect someone else to pick up the check. And we're all called to be part of it. So it's a universal call to holiness, a universal call to follow in the teachings of Christ. And I remember I was at a stewardship conference once, and I was in a procession, a long procession. There was a ton of priests there, and I was in the back of the line, and this guy in front of me was a missionary to the Philippines. And he was talking about how poor these people were, that they literally just lived on top of a cardboard box on the sidewalk. That was their whole existence. And he said they'd make these baskets out of reeds, and they would make like $10 a week. That was their income. $10 a week selling baskets that they made. But they had a tithing envelope. They only had one. They had to ask for it back because they weren't allowed to have more than one. So the first thing they did was they put $1 in their tithing envelope, and they only made 10, but they wanted to tithe 10%. And so all it took was $1, and they felt like they were full participating members of their parish. They gave as much as anybody else because their $1 was 10%, just like anybody else's 10% would be 10%. And the priest telling me this, because I was saying, well, some people are poor, you got to understand. He goes, don't ever rob poor people of their opportunity to tithe and give. It really changes them, and it really changes their hearts and their lives. It's a big deal. They want to do it, and they need to do it for their own spiritual well-being. So the problem with the rich man in the Bible isn't that he's rich. It's not that he wants to create more wealth. That's not a problem. The problem is he wants to claim that as his own and use it for himself. The inner drive to do that, to make myself the primary recipient of my gifts, is in all of us. It is part of that primitive instinct for self-preservation. And there is a time-proven way to counter that drive. The Israelites were taught to give the first fruits of the harvest to God. Do you know what first fruits means? We call it giving off the top, giving in a way that sets a direction to one's whole life. And it offsets that instinct to put me first, to put ourselves first. We give off the top to God, to the tithe. If we begin to think that I am first of all going to give some of my time, my talent, some of my money to the work of the Lord, Jesus said, I've not come to be served, but to serve. And how can we begin to use our time, our talent, and our resources to serve first of all? The best way to live as a disciple of Jesus in an abundant society like America is to give off the top of all our resources. There's never enough left at the end of it all. If you don't give first, you don't give. It just runs out, right? There's too much month at the end of the money. Isn't that the song? Yeah, and it's true for all of us. It's why we give off the top. So when people seek to take measure of their spiritual lives like we do in Lent, we're all taking measure of our spiritual life. People examine their prayer, their honesty, whether they're faithful to their spouse, gossip, stuff like that, right? But the fact is that the one single, most reliable, most accurate, practical measure of our spiritual lives on how we stand with God is our use of money. I want to repeat this because it's a spiritual truth that we resist. In fact, I'll get a letter complaining. the one single, most reliable, most accurate, practical measure of our spiritual lives and how we stand with God is our use of our money. It was much on the mind of Jesus. 16 of his 38 parables were concerned with how we handle money and possessions. In the Gospels, an amazing 1 out of every 10 verses deals directly with the subject of money. The whole Bible offers 500 verses on prayer, fewer than 500 verses on faith, but more than 2,000 verses on money and possessions. Think about that. It was this part of our lives that Jesus was especially concerned with. So, what we have been promoting here, and I want you to maybe make a commitment this year to be part of it, is what I call the 8-1-1 model, okay? The tithe, how many know tithe means 10%? It doesn't mean a little. It doesn't mean give what's in your pocket. Tithe means 10%. That's literally what it means, a tenth. So a tithe is a tenth. So 8-1-1 adds up to 10. So what we promote is 8% to Holy Redeemer, to your parish, to the altar where you worship, 1% to the bishop and the DSA, and 1% to other charities that you might want to give to, whether it's our outreach or any other thing. I used to give 1% to a child in El Salvador. And so that's always a beautiful feeling to do something like that too. So I want everyone to walk together in this and for all of us to be blessed together. The Bible says, the prophet Malachi says, if you bring the whole tithe right here to the altar, he says, watch, put me to the test. I will open up the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing so big you won't be able to contain it. Wow. Yeah. Put God to the test, he says. The only time he says put him to the test. Jesus says you shall not test the Lord your God. So this is God's way. There's no opting out, not for those who truly believe. God is rich and calls us to live rich and generous lives. What a wonderful God we serve. And what a wonderful parish I serve. And what a wonderful faith we have.